Well, the world's in a mess right now. You look at Ukraine, you look at the situation in the Middle East, you look at what's going on in East Asia, and pretty much everywhere you look, you can see rising levels of instability. American power is being contested. We're seeing the rise of movements and governments that are fundamentally opposed to the world order that Americans tried to build after the end of the Cold War. So what I'd like to talk about today is just briefly the three things we ought to do. First, there are a couple of short-term steps that we need to take. The nightmare scenario we face would be that in Estonia or one of the other Baltic republics, we'd see some of what we've seen in Ukraine, a group of pro-Russian militants taking territory, disrupting things, and then perhaps mysterious Russians not in uniform and yet showing a lot of military training, declaring liberated zones on the territory of a NATO member. Would NATO actually be willing to send in force to do something about that, to start a shooting war with Russia? If we didn't do that, we'd be essentially conceding the territory of a NATO member. If we did respond, we risk a war. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen. And that means locking down the border security and other things in those republics. Beyond that, I think Syria is a place where, difficult as things are, the Obama administration still could, by pressing Assad and moving toward getting rid of the Assad government, could change the dynamics, not just in the Middle East, but in the rest of the world. That's the first couple of short-term steps we should do. Then, pulling back to the bigger picture a bit, we need to rethink our analysis of what the end of the Cold War meant. Since 1989, Americans have basically thought we were on easy street, that the progress of liberal markets, liberal democracy was sweeping the world, that we could have a world that looked very much like we want without actually having to do a lot of heavy lifting. And that's been true, I think, both of liberals who, for example, were very excited about Tahrir Square beginning a transition to democracy in Egypt, but I think also people overestimated, say, Tiananmen Square, how long it would take China to become democratic, and certainly the Bush administration underestimated the difficulties of bringing democracy to Iraq and the rest of the Middle East. We've been very optimistic about how easy it's going to be to make the rest of the world the way we want it to be, and we were wrong. So we're going to need now to fall back on strategy and thinking about the long term and developing serious policy for a very difficult world. And finally, we're going to have to think about politics here in the United States, partly because our foreign policy establishment, both on the left and on the right, has made so many mistakes and miscalculations in the last 20 years. American people are not in a mood to be particularly active to support far-reaching policies around the world, to support global engagement. And unfortunately, without public support, there's not a lot the American government can do. So we need to take a step back, and those of us who care about America's role in the world need to seriously think, how do we regain the trust of the American people for the kind of foreign policy they actually do need? Foreign policy is serious business. If America gets it wrong, bad things will follow for us and for people around the world. Well, I think anytime you have citizens getting together to try to promote a free and wide-ranging debate over important issues at the time, that's what democracy is about. A society like ours that doesn't have a vibrant civil society where citizens who are not professional politicians, not day-to-day involved in government, but are doing their best to educate themselves, think about these issues, and engage with their friends and neighbors and colleagues in these kinds of discussions. That's what makes American democracy work. And so I think we're seeing that right here at the Gatestone Institute today.